morning, welcome back to another video. Oh my voice. As you can tell by the title, today's video is going to be about how to survive van life with a really basic setup. First of all as well, let me just tell you that I'm going to pop in the description box below an index of the topics I cover and what time I talk about them. So if you're just looking for a few specific things, feel free to flick on through. As you can see, I'm not in the van anymore, but I have just spent 2 months travelling down the east coast of Australia with my boyfriend. I am making this video because I feel like there is a lot of information out there about how to set up your van to avoid these hassles, but if you don't have the budget for that or the time for that, then this is how to survive with a really basic, minimal setup. So I've made some notes. The first topic I want to cover is the thing that everyone wants to know about when they find out that you're living in a van, and that is hygiene. Specifically showering is the main thing people are curious about. I feel like there's a big misconception that van lifers all smell and don't shower and are dirty hippies and all of that, and I don't think that's true. Having said that, we did come across one guy whose van stunk, and he stunk, but apart from that, I think it's just a bit of a rumour and a stereotype, I guess. The easiest way to shower, I'm gonna say, is if you are a member of like a chain gym. So I was a member of one of those gyms before we left, but once we got about 2 hours south of Sydney, their gyms just kind of stopped. So for the first week and a half, I was going to the gym every day and showering every day. That was a great system, but I wasn't going to keep spending money on that if there weren't any gyms to go to, so I did cancel that membership. How we did it for most of our trip, we would go to a public pool, swim a couple of Ks, well, that's a bit of a stretch there, a K and a half each day. And then we would go and have a proper shower, take our soap and shampoo in and everything like that. So in Australia, every second small town has a swimming pool. That was really easy for us and it worked well. There are also beach showers. They're obviously cold and you can't get full and naked, so but that will do to tide you over if you are a bit stuck. And of course swimming in the ocean as well. Otherwise, baby wipes are always there for you if you need them. I have heard that in America, in some places as well, there are truck stops on the highway that you can stop at and pay to have a shower. I didn't see any of them in Australia, but that is something you might be able to do, depending on where you're going. Alright, and in regards to bathrooms, let me just say first of all, I had a huge thing against public toilets before this trip, and the thought of having to go in a public bathroom every day did kind of freak me out a bit. What can I say? I just adjusted. It's life. Bathrooms are pretty easy to find, especially if you're along the coast. Every beach is going to have a bathroom. Parks, shopping centres, train stations, cafes and restaurants, you know the deal. Unless you're super remote, you should be pretty fine with that. I would suggest so always having some toilet paper in the van, just in case you do get into a sticky situation. Sometimes we'd park somewhere and the bathrooms would close at 9 PM. And at like midnight we'd need to go. There's not much you can do in that situation. I'll talk about this later when I'm talking about how to find places to park, but we would usually Google Maps public toilets as well and find somewhere that was close to them so that we didn't have to go too far in the morning or at night. In terms of keeping clothes clean, as you can imagine, we just went to coin laundries. I didn't really know that coin laundries were much of a thing anymore. I've never noticed them, and now that we've been on the trip, I see them everywhere. It's so weird. So we would just wash our clothes every 2 weeks or so. Most laundries also have like a really good charging station, so you can charge all your electronics while you're doing the laundry. This one here is a terrible example. This was outside of Hobart, but the others we went to were pretty well set up. I kind of understand that having a bin in the space that you sleep in might be a bit of a turn off for some people, and I was a bit concerned about that before we left. I was sort of like, oh, like what if it smells? It was actually fine for the whole trip. So obviously we just emptied that when it got full into a public bin. Recycling though was the bane of my existence on this trip. It seemed that areas would either have recycling bins absolutely everywhere or nowhere at all, and a couple of times our collection really built up, but we weren't going to put it in the normal bin because we're just not about that life. We got to a point in Tasmania where it had been about 2 weeks without a recycling bin in sight, and we finally found one at this tourist attraction. I don't know if that was legal or not, but you gotta do what you gotta do for the environment. Alright, next topic is food storage, cooking, all of that stuff. In terms of what we would eat on a usual day, I think the first 2 days we started off cooking oats when we were really like motivated and fresh-faced to the van life scene. Does that make sense? I don't know. And after that it was just way too much effort to get the whole stove out and cook every morning, and we had to cook for lunch and dinner as well most days. So we went back to Wheat Bix and fruit. We switched over to buying like the little 3 packs of mini soy and almond milks, and that worked pretty well for us for breakfast. We had our camp master stove, which is pretty standard if you are traveling in a van. Most people seem to have these. Not really any complaints, just it would take a long time to boil sometimes, and if you're cooking harder foods like potatoes, it can be a bit tedious. One pot meals are really what you want to go for on the road. Curries, lentil dishes, like little Mexican bean dishes, things like wraps, rice pepper rolls and all of that are great for lunch if you don't feel like cooking. And I think it's always a good idea to have baked beans, tin spaghetti and all of that in case of emergency. So as you can imagine, with the minimal setup, we didn't have a fridge. We did start off with a fridge that could be plugged in, but we didn't have a dual battery, so that wasn't really much help. We thought about filling it up with ice and doing an esky style thing, but there are a few problems with that. One, ice usually comes in big packets and they were too big for our little fridge. 2, money and maintenance. It just seemed like a lot of effort. And 3, just all the plastic the ice came in. So we tried to combat our little fridge situation. Awesome. It's still there. That was good for about 12 hours in the fridge, and then overnight it kind of melted, the condensation went everywhere and everything went moldy. So we actually ditched the fridge. We left it with a relative after a couple of weeks, and we didn't have any cold storage for the rest of the time on the road. We wasted too much food in the first couple of weeks trying to figure out how we were going to store stuff and how long things would last outside of the fridge, and eventually we kind of came to the conclusion that we needed to go grocery shopping pretty much every day and just buy what we needed for that day and maybe the next day. That might seem like a huge hassle to some people, but for us it was easier than buying ice all the time and having to maintain that. And we're also one of those weird couples that love grocery shopping, so not a huge problem for us. Some general advice though, things that don't keep well on hot days, as you can imagine, things like lettuce, cucumber, zucchini, tomato, capsicum. We had one incident where a capsicum kind of melted, and that was the one time that our van did really smell. Softer fruits as well, like peaches, mangoes and all of that don't tend to keep too well if it's hot. Definitely not watermelon. Bread and wraps, not a great idea either. So if you do expect some hot days while you're traveling, I would recommend going for things like rice cakes instead of bread, or just buying like a really small packet of bread. Things that did keep well, potatoes, cauliflower, broccoli, apples, bananas, just like your standard solid hard foods. Water, so as you can imagine, no running water in the van either. What we had were 3 10-litre water containers that actually came with the van when Josh bought it, and we would just fill them up. We didn't have a problem finding taps. Every beach has like drinking water and all that. Washing up without running water was really challenging sometimes. That little like basin bucket thing that I mentioned before, we just used that to wash up. We'd fill that up with some water, use our little squeegee and detergent. It is a luxury being home and just being able to wash up in the sink, let me tell you. Bugs and creepy crawlies and all of that. 3 things we did here. First of all, the van actually came with like fly screen cut out to shape for the windows with little magnets around the outside. It'd be pretty easy to make, I think, so that was great. We could have the windows down on a hot night, put the fly screen up and the bugs wouldn't get in. 2, we would kind of fumigate the van before the sun would set if it was a buggy kind of area. AeroGuard is definitely an essential. Obviously AeroGuard yourself as well. And number 3, I don't know if this is really proven to work, but incense is supposed to keep bugs away, so we would sometimes burn some of that in the van as well to keep them out. One night a mosquito got stuck in the van and I was sleeping with the blanket and had my face this way. And I woke up the next morning and had literally 20 mosquito bites all down the side of my face. It was a great time. Alright, another common question is finding places to sleep. So we didn't pay for a campsite on the whole 2 months that we were away. I'm still pretty impressed by that, to be honest with you. First criteria we would have when finding a camp spot would be that it had a public toilet nearby. Google Maps doesn't really have an exhaustive list of public bathrooms, so if you're like looking at an area and it doesn't come up with anything, or it's like a beach where you think there should be a public toilet, it's likely that there will be one. Google Maps is just a bit behind with that. Trust me, you probably will want a bathroom nearby for when you wake up in the morning. The best places we found to park were always just car parks on the side of beaches. Most of them didn't have any no camping signs up or anything like that. And you get views like this when you wake up in the morning, so can't complain at all. Wikicamps is a great app if you're traveling within Australia. I think it's somewhere between $5 and $10 to buy the app, and that just gives you a complete map of all the places that people have stayed before, and they can leave reviews and tell you whether they had a problem there or not. Great resource, we use that so much on our trip. There are also a bunch of Facebook groups. There'll probably be one for the area that you're looking at travelling in. If you pop a question in there, people will usually be able to give you advice. Twice on the trip we did have to park on a residential street. I would recommend just setting the bed up and everything before you get to the street, parking there, jumping straight in and going to sleep. Obviously don't cook a meal outside someone's house. We tried our absolute hardest to steer clear of the no camping signs. There was one night where we drove around for about 45 minutes looking for a spot, and we did finally find one that didn't have a sign up. But some areas are really hard ass on it, and that usually is because people have plushed there, taken up all the spots, been disrespectful, people have complained, and the council have put the signs up. So just really try to be respectful of the area. If it is a really busy car park and you're taking up a spot like 5 nights in a row, people are more likely to complain if they notice that. So yeah, I mentioned that we steered clear for no camping signs for most of the trip. There are a couple of places on the Great Ocean Road where there was nowhere we could park that didn't have one of these signs up, and we just had to risk it. I think that if you are quiet and respectful and clean, people aren't going to have a problem with it, and we never got a knock on our door or anything like that. That brings me on to people's reactions, and I'm going to say that I didn't know what to expect before we left, but most people had an overwhelmingly positive response when they would see the van. Most people are just curious, they want to see what it's like inside. Sometimes you do get some weird looks, which I guess is also understandable. Some people just might not have seen people living in a van before, and it's a bit different, you know? I'm gonna drink this before it goes cold. Two things that were kind of negative happened while we were in the van. On our second night, actually, we were in a car park next to the beach. It was just us and another van that were parked there overnight. And sometime after midnight, this other van came in, was approaching and then reversing from our van with the headlights on full glare, honking the horn, really bizarre. And the guy in the other van that was sleeping there overnight said the next morning that it looked like it was like a trade van. That was a pretty random, isolated incident. And another morning when we were parking in Melbourne on a beach car park, we opened the door and there was a bag of lemons outside. Another random thing, which is kind of related, I guess, but you tend to care a lot less about what people think of how you look. When you have to go to the bathroom at midnight and you're wearing a pair of slides with a pair of fluffy socks and a skirt and a random thermal that you pulled out of a drawer, you just get used to not really giving a fuck of people's opinions on you. And that's something that I've carried with me into life back at home as well. Not that I wore makeup every day before I left, but I wear it so much less often now. I'm not even wearing it right now. Hello internet, here's my face. And I think that is a huge positive thing. Just one of the many lessons that I learned on the trip. This is really going to depend on where you're travelling, but weather is something that you'll need to take into consideration. Australian summer is pretty hot, so we were mostly dealing with that rather than the cold. I would recommend maybe getting a battery operated fan if you are going somewhere quite warm, because we didn't have one, but I think we really could have used it a couple of times. There were only a few nights that were absolutely unbearable in the van, but it is just so hard to sleep when it's that kind of night. And there was one night where we actually cheated on the van and bought an Airbnb for the night because it was 40 something degrees in Melbourne and we were just like, no way are we sleeping in this van tonight. It did have some basic installation. Whether or not that really helped, I'm not sure. So obviously common sense on hot days, leave the windows and door open for as long as you can before you go to bed to kind of get the air in. And yeah, get those mosquito nets so that you can leave the front windows open while you're sleeping. We did have a few nights that were quite cold in Tasmania. I think it dropped to about 10-12 degrees Celsius overnight sometimes, which I know isn't freezing in the scheme of things, but when you're in a van it's quite noticeable. So we packed plenty of blankets, thermals, socks, beanies and all that, and obviously again just leave all the doors and windows shut instead of open leading up to bedtime so that the van does retain some of the warmth from the day. Rain sucks when you're living in a van. We're really lucky, we only had a few rainy days. All I can suggest here is just to find something to do inside that isn't in the van, because you do get cabin fever if you're in there for a long time, and bring with you a bunch of things to entertain you as well. Speaking of entertainment, it is likely if you're travelling for a long time and aren't working or studying that you're going to get a little bit bored. We certainly did at times. Plenty of books, plenty of Sudokus, sketch pads, puzzles, card games, movies if you have laptops and all of that will really save your life when you're starting to feel like that. Alright, let's talk about charging electronic devices. This was a real struggle at some points on the trip for us. So basically we had you know what I'm talking about, like it plugs into the cigarette lighter. It's like a little voltage cube thing. Just like the more things you plugged in though, the slower it charged. and obviously it only works when you're driving. So for the first couple of weeks when we were just traveling about 20 minutes, half an hour a day on average, it was a massive struggle to try and keep everything charged. If you only have a couple of phones, it's probably not a huge deal. Take some portable chargers for them in case of emergencies, you should be fine. But because I was trying to film on the road, I had my camera, my GoPro, my drone, my laptop for editing, both of our phones, and it was an uphill battle trying to keep that all charged. Other methods of charging would be going to a cafe, spending an hour or so there, ordering a couple of drinks and just plugging all your electronics in at a power point. Like I said before, laundromats usually have a pretty good charging setup, so that might be a good place for you to do that while you wait for your washing. Shopping centres I think sometimes have charging stations as well, and libraries are usually a great place to charge your things. This is just like a random story, but we stopped at this library in Melbourne and I was trying to upload one of my videos, and it was like a tiny library, and I went over to charge it near the computers. There were like 4 computers, they were all empty, and I found a little charging socket like right down the back of the computer because there didn't seem to be any else in the library. And I plugged that in and we were just sitting there, and then this librarian comes up and she was like, "What's going on over here? There's a lot of fussing around, a lot of moving about. What seems to be the problem?" And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, "Oh, I'm charging my laptop." And she was like, that's a problem. Basically she said that people liked to use those computers during the day and that I couldn't really charge my laptop there. Which, like, fair enough. And she did point out at the back there were some more charging points like hidden under a table, which was fine. I went and charged it over there, but the way she delivered that message was quite rude. And also the fact that the tables were empty. Like, it's not like there was a line of people waiting to use the computers and I was in the way. I don't really know why I put that story in, but it makes me laugh. Okay, the next point I want to cover is safety. And this is not something that I really thought about before we left on the trip, but people would kind of ask me like, "Are you going with someone else?" And they'd be really relieved when I said that I was going with my boyfriend. And after coming back, I do kind of understand now the concern. It sucks in a way because I don't want to say don't go by yourself. Like, certainly go by yourself. Just be aware of your surroundings. We didn't really have many incidents with safety, but you've got to consider things like if you need to go to the bathroom at midnight and you're in a bit of a weird isolated area and you're by yourself, just be cautious is all I'm saying. Try to park somewhere where there are other people around or within earshot. A couple of stories that we do have though. There was one night where we parked by a lake in Murrumbula and it was about 2 AM and we could hear some fiddling around outside the van, and it was pretty clear that the noises were kind of very close and there were a few like hushed voices as well. It was pretty creepy. I thought someone was trying to break into the van. Josh recognised the pin coming out of our bike rack. There were a couple of teenagers outside. We think they were drunk, trying to steal our bikes. Josh just kind of like banged on the window and yelled some stuff and they bolted. I don't think they realised there were people in the van. It was pretty frightening, like at first when we heard the noises, because I just assumed someone was going to break into the van. The next day we were actually in the main part of that town, and it's a fairly small town, and there were a couple of teenagers who were dressed the same that were kind of like passed out on this little section of concrete, looking a bit worse for wear. So we actually think that it was them. Something else that actually came up in my day in the life of video as well, we went down to this really isolated beach down a 4-wheel drive track, and there was no one else there apart from this random couple. They were just giving us some very odd vibes. We hadn't really like spoken to them or interacted with them, but we did not feel comfortable staying there at all, and they seemed like they were going to be there for the night. They were just there in a ute and they hadn't really left the ute for about an hour. They were just kind of hanging around, just saying some weird things, and so we decided to get out of there and find somewhere else to stay. So yeah, just trust your gut. If you think something feels a bit weird, move on. If you're traveling with someone, you're going to get to know them very, very intimately. If you're traveling like we were, where we weren't studying or working, we were literally with each other pretty much 24/7 for 2 whole months. It's basically like moving in with someone but on steroids, because you're in a tiny space, probably half the size of your bedroom. You're doing everything together. For us as well, we were quite busy in the lead up. We were seeing each other maybe once a week and we'd never lived together before. I think I kind of expected us to have more problems, but we were quite fine. Obviously just keep the communication open. If you need some alone time, have some alone time. Go and do something by yourself for a few hours and you'll probably come back feeling refreshed and ready to continue the adventure. Also, just consider, if you are getting a bit narky with the other person, which we certainly did sometimes, ask yourself if you're hungry. I can guarantee like 90% of the time when I found myself getting a bit irritated or narky at Josh, I was probably hungry. Alright, what to bring in the van? This is obviously going to depend on where you're traveling. I would recommend trying to pack as light as possible. Enough clothes for maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks, plenty of socks and undies. I would always recommend bringing pillows from home that you're used to. I didn't do that and I found myself so uncomfortable half the trip. If you can get a proper mattress in the van, my god, I would recommend it, because ours was just so thin and so uncomfortable, and it was really hard to sleep at times. Other essentials: hand sanitizer, especially because beach bathrooms often don't have soap, toilet paper for emergencies, portable chargers, baby wipes, AeroGuard, sunscreen, and like a little bucket or a basin, I guess, we did the washing up in and everything like that. We used that for a bunch of things and that was great. Scissors, Tupperware for leftovers and all of that, bottle opener as well. I would recommend against bringing a whole bunch of stuff for hobbies that you don't do very often. I think just as humans in general, we tend to think, when this happens, I'll have so much more time to do this. And living in a van seems like the perfect place to learn new hobbies because you're going to have so much free time. But if you bring things for like 5 hobbies you've never done before and they take up all of your space, it's unlikely that you're going to actually follow through and do all those 5 things. So I recommend mostly just bringing things that you already have that you know you are going to use, and maybe a couple of extra things that you want to learn to do. Things get messy really fast in the van and they also go missing very quickly. It's not like your bedroom where a few clothes on the floor don't really make a huge difference. As soon as a few things are hanging around in the van, it looks like a bomb has hit it. So pack light. And if you can, leave yourself plenty of time to set the van up and arrange everything in the van before you leave. We were in a rush. We both finished working like the day before we left for our trip. Josh just came here and I threw all my stuff in the van, and it took us about a week to actually find a system that would work with storage. So if you have extra time before you leave, try and set it up before you head off. So yeah, my thoughts on van life. I was ready to come home at the end. We both were ready to come home, but now that I am home, I would give anything to be back on the road. I mean, when you can open your door and see the most beautiful beach right outside your living space and you're there for free, it's just incomparable. So yes, it will be messy, it will be tough, you will probably be tired half the time, but it is 100% worth it, and I am so grateful that I've had that experience. I would definitely do it again. I don't think I could live in a van full time and do work and study or whatever I was doing. I think that would be a real challenge. But again, it would depend on how well set up the van was. If I could stand up in the van and there was a proper cooking space and a shower and running water, it might be a possibility. If you're about to head off on a trip, have the best time, and hopefully this video has been helpful in some way for you. If I've missed anything that you wanted to know about, please leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching.